The black vapour curled around us. Even at these depths, it was clear and in control. Dark, swirling, and for the first time since entering the wreck, I understood why Cairnfury feared Old Rook's ship. I work in a small convenience store, but we're not easy to find, and I couldn't tell you how long I've been here. I'm not a native local to Cairnfury, that's to say I wasn't born here, but I found my way to the coast as a young man in my 20s. The locals aren't unfriendly, but if you weren't Cairnfury born and bred, you will never be truly accepted, because if you weren't born here, you can never understand. If you are visiting, if you are a tourist, you will be welcomed, but there is a sense of expectation that you will move on soon. Don't mistake surface friendliness for acceptance, and don't overstay your welcome. That's the best advice I can give. I live about 10 miles out from the main Cairnfury port, a little village called Cairnfury. There are only a few hundred of us who live here, some fishermen and others. I'm not sure what they do. And me. I came here searching for something, looking for respite from a busy life which made no sense. The port I arrived in, Port Melody, was packed, full of life, but I felt calm. No one bothered me, and I was free to move around as I pleased. I fully intended to explore the area for a few days and then move on. I'd been enticed by the stories of smugglers and what treasure they'd been forced to abandon. I didn't really think. I was interested in joining a tourist expedition, which was venturing out 2 days after I arrived. I'd heard a group discussing their plans in a pub, and I wandered over, introduced myself. There were 4 of them, 2 from London, 1 from New York, and another girl from Sydney. They were travelling across the UK and decided they couldn't miss Cairnfury off their itinerary. After what happened to us, I imagine they wished they had. They were happy to include me as I had diving experience, and the next morning we set off early. The old cottages sparkled white in the early dawn light, and I took this as a positive sign of what treasures we might find. I watched the fishing boats bob up and down, heading off in different directions for the day's work. All the fishermen looked at us as we passed by, stony expressions on all their faces, and I saw one shaking his head. "You have to understand," explained our guide, a man in his 30s called Declan. "Centuries ago, smuggling was as much a part of life to sustain the economy as fishing." He gestured to the sea around us, and farming and even mining. It's a part of Cairnfury's history, and many people believe that we should let what lies beneath rest for eternity. But the sunken wreck is a magnificent sight, well worth the trip for enthusiastic divers. I can't promise any treasures though. A cordial, "Oh no," and then laughter went around the boat. In any case, anything worth finding has long gone, and if anything is still there, it should stay there. But the ship we will be diving near looks strangely still intact, even after all this time. There are barnacles and the bow is broken, but otherwise she looks incredible, considering this wreck was over 200 years ago. Although we all had the appropriate training and experience, Declan explained this would be a non-penetration dive, meaning we would be exploring the outside of the wreck, rather than going into the wreck itself. There was a part of me that felt some inexplicable relief when I heard that. Although it is in remarkable good shape, there are still some potentially hazardous areas. We know there are a couple of tight passageways. Also, I always bring another instructor and leader with me when we do limited or full penetration dives to the wreck, as I don't cover that. When we were about 5 miles out, Declan turned the boat towards an old cove. It was dark, and the water near it seemed still and calm, as if it were waiting. "Now, I should warn you," said Declan, almost casually, "that even though this is an exploration of the outside, it does still carry risks." "I thought you said it was intact?" queried Sheila, one of the Londoners. "Oh, it is, but I cannot guarantee absolute safety. You've been diving, you understand. Things can happen. Sudden currents even here. Now, the wood of the ship is very old, but you all have the prerequisite training and qualifications. I'm looking forward to the dive. Shame we can't go into the wreck this time, but maybe next, a confident voice said, shooting a look at Declan. This was Philip, Sheila's boyfriend. She rolled her eyes in good humour. Robert, who preferred Bob, was the New Yorker, and Denise was from Australia. They made up the rest of our small group. She'd arrived in the UK a month ago and had found herself drawn, like me, to Cairnfury. I don't know, she said. There's definitely a vibe about this place. Maybe it's good we can't go fully inside. She shrugged to herself. I'm just happy to be doing some diving. This coast is beautiful. Bob didn't say anything, but looked out towards the sea. Declan began filling us in on some local history, and more details about the dive site. He explained the history of the Morning Lark, how it had been travelling from the Far East, and the first mate had cunningly engineered a change in route. He'd been in league with the person controlling the Cairnfury lighthouse, and the light stopped working for a crucial few minutes. After the ship crashed on the rocks, the first mate was able to escape with some of the haul. What happened to the first mate after that is not known. The captain, in his anger, as the ship was sinking, used his sword to swipe at those he thought might have betrayed him, only realising too late it was his first mate. In his grief, he closed himself in his cabin as the waters closed around him. His name was Captain Elias Rook. Locally, it's known as Old Rook's Ship rather than the Morning Lark, said Declan conversationally. There are so many legends around it. I mean, I've grown up hearing them all my life. There's a local superstition that you don't dive near it at certain times of the year. For example, never on Old Rook's birthday. Don't worry, we are safe. That's not till November. And of course, not to take anything that might belong to one of the crew who died. There's nothing there now, but odd things were said to have happened to those who chanced upon any of the cargo after the wreck. What kind of things? Asked Sheila. Oh, like they died strangely or died too young. He coughed. And the legend is their souls are then tied to the ship. They can never leave. And another superstition is not to go into the captain's cabin. How many times have you made the dive? Asked Denise. Declan paused before answering. Oh, many times, he said, and looked away. Have you been in the wreck? Asked Philip shrewdly. Declan looked wary. Not fully, he said quietly. I have the necessary experience, but I've only ever done a limited incursion, nothing more. Maybe it's because I've grown up hearing all the ghost stories of Old Rook's ship. It's magnificent, but I prefer to view it from the outside. There are a couple of other rumours. That the ship itself has a grievance against Cairnfury. That it has a will of its own. That's why it still looks so good for its age. It's fighting against the water that could destroy it. And the legend is sometimes the ship will take a soul. How? I asked. Declan shrugged. I'm not sure. It just takes them. We have had some people dive who haven't been seen again. Sheila looked horrified at this news. But that's mainly down to different record keeping in the 50s and 60s. People dived and then moved on, that's all. It was a very different lifestyle. We stayed silent, looking at each other. I was wondering how far the myths would affect us once we were in the water. But I still wanted to dive. I wanted to see this wreck. As we approached the dive site, Declan went through the hand signals as a precaution. And if I make this signal, he indicated a clear thumbs up sign, we end the dive and begin the ascent to the surface. And of course, you know this, but we will go slowly, not just for ourselves, but to protect any marine life there. The water was dark and still as the small boat stopped. This seemed positive. The sun was out and everything felt calm. Declan looked around, suddenly seeming slightly uneasy. He coughed again and said, I need to let you know that we can turn around if anyone is unsure about the dive. There is no pressure to do this. You are diving of your own free will. He didn't make eye contact with us as he said this. Denise and I exchanged a look. It sounded like he was reciting something by rote. We all murmured we were fine to dive, and he snapped back to attention, all smiles. The same Declan who'd been chatting and guiding us during the ride. And then we arrived. The dark grey rocks beckoning to gulls swooping past and inviting us to moor near them. I chose to back roll into the sea, but I noticed Denise and Bob both opted for the giant stride method. The water was surprisingly clear, and the surface did not hide rougher currents. It felt warm and safe. Declan signalled to us and made the OK sign, and we all responded. Following his instructions, we moved through the water, following him and his torch. The wreck rested deeper than any I'd explored before, nearly 40 metres below the surface. Suddenly, there it was, my first glimpse of the morning lark. It really was stunning. Lying there on the seabed, encased in barnacles, but the wood still looked intact. It was remarkable. I'd never seen a ship like this on previous dives. Declan had agreed to be my dive buddy, and he motioned for me to follow him around the port side. I got up close to the ship and stared in. I could see fragments of objects as I peered through a porthole into a cabin. And I was sure I could see something glinting inside, almost glowing. I beckoned to Declan to look, but he shook his head. He did not want to touch the wreck. I looked again and turned my torch onto it. It was a watch, what looked like a gold pocket watch. The others were also exploring the other side, and we moved to join them. I could see through their goggles their eyes showed the same excitement that mine must have expressed. This was an unbelievable experience. Then I realised Philip was making an excited hand gesture. He'd seen something too. It was clear he wanted to go inside. We were now on the starboard side, and he was gesturing at a broken door. He turned his torch beam excitedly towards a dark section of the hull, half hidden by moving seaweed. I moved over to him. As I joined him, I could see what he was aiming his torch at. There was what looked like a single but large gold coin, just lying there on the deck. We all looked over at Declan, who was now behind us. Declan reacted instantly. A sharp slicing motion across his throat. No. It was unequivocally clear. But Philip ignored him. He moved closer to the wreck and shone his torch more closely at the coin. The faint golden glimmer intensified. Beside me, I saw Sheila hesitate. Then Philip made a beckoning gesture towards her and disappeared through the opening. I was shocked. We'd been explicitly told not to go into the wreck itself. This was stupid. As his buddy and as his partner, Sheila had no choice but to follow him. I could see she was scared, but she went in. She was trying to get him to change his mind and get him to come back. Declan swam forward immediately, agitated now, signalling repeatedly for them to come back out. His movements had lost all the calm professionalism he'd shown on the boat. Bob glanced at me once before moving away. He gave me a strange look, and then he dove further, and I couldn't see him anymore. Declan froze, and I realised with horror he was not going to go after them. I hesitated. I felt bad for Sheila going in there unprotected. Maybe if I went in, Philip would listen to reason. Seeing my movement, Denise grabbed my arm sharply, shaking her head. I crossed the threshold and went through the broken door. Then everything changed. A cloud of dark vapour spilled suddenly from the porthole, like ink through water. It wasn't smoke, how could it be? It felt thicker, and it was moving against the currents. Sheila burst briefly back into view, twisting violently, as though trying to free herself from something inside the wreck. Philip appeared beside her, wrestling with the same invisible force, and then they both vanished again into the darkness. The inky, dark vapour carried on moving throughout the ship. I felt flung backwards and hit the side of my head. I was briefly disorientated before I realised I was now back in the cabin I'd seen earlier. There was the watch on the floor of the cabin. I looked at it, but I didn't touch it. It wasn't mine to take. As I was making my way out of the cabin, trying to find the others again, I thought I saw a face near what was the bed. A shadowy, angry face. Some impulse made me bow to it, and then I dove away. I freed myself and took one last look at the watch, but I needed to find the others. And where the hell was Declan? And then I saw them. Not the others I dove with to this wreck, but the other others. Apparitions were all around me, staring at me. There were so many faces, but even in these dark waters, I could see them clearly. And I thought I could see different fashions from different eras. Clearly, here were some from the fateful sinking, men in clothes from the 1800s, but there were others more recent. A woman who was in 1920s clothing, and these were surely two men from the 50s. And then I saw two familiar faces among the ghostly audience watching us. Sheila and Philip were watching me sadly. Sheila and Philip. Their forms intertwined with each other, and now the ship. If it were possible, I know I would have screamed, in shock and despair. But where was my fear? Why didn't I feel more scared? It was so unfair. I had just wanted to visit, to explore. I didn't intend for this. They were so young. They had plans. I raced around to the other side. Declan was still there, but he kept apart from me and Denise. I reached out to her and made the thumbs up signal so we could do the ascent together. But as I reached out to grab her hand, I felt something tug me in the sternum. I was back in the captain's cabin. And I knew the man now staring back at me was old Rook himself. I moved to the door and tried to find another way out, but I kept being dragged back by an invisible force to that room. From the depth of the cabin, I looked up and could just see a fragment of bright blue sky far, far above us, the sun shining down. I don't know how I could still see it, but I could see the top of the water rippling, which distorted the image of Declan, now back on the boat, looking down into the water, checking the remains. He walked up and down a few times, then he was out of sight, and a minute later, the small boat drifted away. The gold watch was somehow in my hand, but I know I hadn't picked it up. Had I? It glinted gently. The sun was still shining through. I took in my last deep breath and looked at my regulator and watched the pressure gauge fall lower and lower. I closed my eyes and prayed. I don't know who I was praying to. Maybe to old Rook. This was his ship, his cabin, which would now surely be my grave too. I don't know how much time had passed. I looked up and realised I was on the sandy beach. I was no longer in my scuba gear, but in the clothes I'd worn when I arrived at the meeting point, when Declan had taken our picture before we set out. My striped t-shirt and blue Bermuda shorts. But where was my gear? Where were the others? How had I got here? I sat up and felt my head. There was no bruise and it felt okay. I checked the rest of me, no scratches, no damage. And that's when I realised I was holding the gold watch. I swear I hadn't meant to take it with me. I was confused but otherwise calm. I must have been thrown from the boat somehow as we were making our way back. But I didn't remember the ascent. Where were Denise and Bob? And what happened to Sheila and Philip? Hazy images came back to me. The black curling smoke making its way through the cabins. Denise's eyes visible through her goggles, looking terrified, her blonde hair swirling about her. Sheila tugging at Philip. But was he stuck? Is that what I remembered? And Declan, who was supposed to be my diving buddy, staying outside the wreck. Oh, what was it he had said? I couldn't remember. The images were drifting away from my memory. I began to walk up the beach and saw in the distance a convenience store. It was small, and a sign which said Harbour Break Stores, established 1805. There was a larger sign as I left the beach which said Cairnfury, population 102. But I was passing the sign. I saw the figure 2 blur and change. Now it read population 103. So many days have passed. I don't know how many. There is a radio in the store. I've noticed a change in the music. When I first walked through the doors, Funboy 3 was on the radio. Then some Bonnie Tyler. I always liked her. I don't know how many weeks had passed, but there was one song the station played over and over again. It was called Supersonic by a band from Manchester. More recently, I've been humming Video Games by a singer, I forget her name, but there is a haunting melody, the harps, the violins. It stays in my head for days. I think I do a good job in the store. I check the stock every day, but it's always replenished. I never need to order anything. I happily give directions and advice on what sights to see to people who come in. But I remind tourists that it's wise to keep moving. I remind them gently, I don't want to scare them. You are free to leave the village any time you choose, but I've seen it happen. The longer you stay, the harder it is to find the village boundary where you cross back into the rest of Cairnfury. There are a few regular customers who keep coming back in, looking confused and lost. I always try to keep them calm, answer their questions, and then they leave again. This really is a beautiful place. My eyes are frequently drawn to the gold watch I keep with me. I hear it ticking, and I look at the engraving. Elias, with all my love and safety on the seas, Jemima. Article from the Cairnfury Chronicle, dated June 14th, 1983. 2 tourists from London have been found dead by the shoreline, close to the resting place of the Morning Lark, Cairnfury's most famous wreck. Sheila Lewis and Philip Moss, both 27, were diving with a small group when they became separated. The 3 others from the diving party are still missing. They are Felix Anscombe, 28, from Yorkshire, Denise Finn, 31, from Sydney, Australia, and Robert Bob Mason, 30, from New York, USA. Donald Mearside, 52, fisherman, who helms the mighty platter, which provides Cairnfury with its excellent fresh fish, said he saw the crew leave early that morning. I might have been the last to see them on land. And that's a thought right enough. Declan Driscoll, who led the expedition, was deeply saddened after the event. As a local lad, born and bred, he understands the currents, and said he believes a rogue current swept the group away, as only 2 bodies have been recovered. I did try to warn them, he said ruefully, and we followed the safety instructions to the letter. But inexperience is no match for these Cairnfury currents. And unfortunately, Miss Lewis and Mr. Moss did try exploring inside the wreck. As we all know, you shouldn't do that. Declan is a familiar and trusted face in Cairnfury, born to Madeline and Nigel, who run the Mariner's Tale public house, which has been standing for 2 centuries. An inquest has been opened and adjourned. Thank you for listening, and join us next week for another story.